I want to just thank you all for being here, and many of you are doing, hard work in your communities, and so thank you for your hard work and your commitment to and your interest in elections. And special thanks to our Take Back Elections folks who are working really hard to bring forth best practices for a comprehensive, sweeping, unified reform for all 50 states, first as a state constitutional amendment by ballot initiative starting in those states, and also working with state legislatures that we feel we might have some success with. But then ultimately, through these changes, how they will manifest once we get the reforms passed and started allowing them to sort of bear fruit. So ultimately in the federal Constitution as well as an amendment to the Constitution. So I'll let you know that you can find archived recorded meetings of previous meetings on our website under the resources tab. And so that way you can watch previous ones you may have missed on some other topics in this whole election system reform. And we hope that you'll join our work if you haven't already. We have a Facebook group, and you can get on an email list at the website. And we have frequent Tuesday night meetings that allow our smaller working groups to cover a topic of interest in this overview and this full election reform. So I will quickly introduce myself to Welch. And I've started this organization, but also I've been a lifelong activist, and I've been more so in the last 10 years of my life, started out by focusing on environmental and climate issues primarily, and founded several organizations related to these causes. I have learned how to work at all levels of government through these years of activism, successfully building coalitions, changing local dynamics in my own hometown, and guiding successful state ballot initiatives and policy. The work with the organizations I've started continues to bear fruit in their different areas today, locally, statewide, and even nationally. They have expanded to be areas that impact racial, social, cultural, economic, and environmental justice issues. That's kind of a byline that we've been using in one of our organizations, People's Visioning, since before it started to become more popular here in the last year or so to hear those kinds of terms. So also just seeing the depth of our nation's problems with our elections after the 2017 primary, I, with a handful of other people, began writing some sweeping, comprehensive 50-state unified solutions and election reforms. And we've been shepherding the work and this process into a collective effort now called Take Back Elections. And we are revising, researching, fleshing out, vetting, and moving forward a plan to accomplish these necessary reforms. We're writing language now to provide a unified language that can be taken to the ballot in the ballot initiative states and taken to friendly legislatures. And so we hope that you will consider joining us if you haven't by joining our Facebook group, and also get involved and interact with the pieces that we have on our website, where you can sign up for email or sign up to be part of a small working group, or sign up to help or work in your own state, either help a state or work in a state of your own that has the ballot initiative. I want to mention a couple of housekeeping things real quickly. If you haven't been on a Zoom meeting before, you can hover across the bottom edge of your screen and you will see that there's a chat box. You can make some comments, ask questions. I'm not sure I'll be able to see the questions there, but we will have a Q&A as well. And you can at least have your questions logged in the chat box, or comments or thoughts. and those we keep and look at going forward. And if you do join us through either the website or the Facebook group, we can eventually get your questions answered if somehow that didn't happen during this meeting. So let's see. I think I've talked a little bit about the numbers in order to really make a big impact on a real correction to what's going on. So gerrymandering is one of the earliest ways that our political process was weighted in one direction or another. So I want to start out on that topic by giving a brief history or a little bit of an overview of the history. Gerrymandering, actually, the practice began prior to the naming of the term gerrymander, which happened in 1812 in the state of Massachusetts. It was named for Governor Elbridge Gerry, whose party was in power at the time, and that party changed the district lines in the way that most of us are kind of familiar is what goes on, to give the balance of power to his party and keep him in power or in the office of the governor. So you can look over to the side of the screen that we've got sharing the gerrymandering in the US, and you can see that is actually a cartoon that went out back in 1812. And that's probably the thing that gave the name its popularity, because even though the idea existed before, this particular shape that they drew to be successful became what people thought looked like a salamander. So they called it gerrymander, and it began to kind of spread to other states, just sort of the buzz, the gossip at the time. So that's what how they drew the state. There's probably another, you can scroll down a little further, Adrian, see if there's another representation of that. I believe there is, so that you can see how the other states, there we go, there's another representation, you can leave it there, that shows what they did to make the different districts the way they wanted them to. And right above that is a little graph that shows how gerrymandering is able to steal an election, where you are looking at that graph and chart, the precincts. If you have more precincts that are blue and fewer that are red, you can see how if you divide them evenly, the ones that are in the majority win. But if you go around and work the divisions in a different way, you can find ways to divide these districts up that actually allows the party that really has less people to represent to actually gain power. That's basically what goes on. But on the history side of it, it really started at the beginning of even before our very first Congress convened, and it began in Virginia with the Anti-Federalists and Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry had supposedly said, "Give me liberty or give me death." But I want to just say that he and his Confederates were resolved that Virginia's congressmen would be elected from districts, and several other states had chosen to elect their representatives on a statewide basis. Was another option that happened for quite a few years in our early history, and until 1842. But after choosing this district idea, they then stipulated that each representative from Virginia would have to run from the district where that person resided, and then they drew the 5th district around James Madison's home in the town of Orange to include as many anti-federalists as possible, hoping that they could keep him from winning the representative election for the first U.S. House of Representatives. They came very close, but they ultimately weren't successful. However, his maneuver, being the first instance of congressional gerrymandering, is impressive considering we weren't, hadn't even had our first Congress yet. But some of the biographers observed that maybe, we should have called it Henrymandering, but the folks in Virginia weren't quick enough to invent the word. So nevertheless, this practice has continued, and it's been practiced by all parties in power, because when I say both, there have actually been Whigs and Democrats, and there was an anti-Masonic power and Republicans and the anti-Federalists. So it doesn't really matter what party, was in power. They all used the technique once they saw how it was working. So anyway, that is now, there are some examples of other people that have used it, like gerrymandering with a J for Jerry Brown in California, and Perrymandering for Rick Perry in Texas. So it's kind of a term that we play around with, even though it's definitely something that's very harmful to our democracy. Also, later on, the practice of gerrymandering happened around the borders of new states as the nation continued to grow beyond the Civil War and late into the 19th century. The Republican Party used its control of Congress to secure admission of more states in territories friendly to their party. And an example of this is the Dakota Territory, which was admitted as 2 states instead of 1. And by the rules for representation in the Electoral College, each new state carried at least 3 electoral votes, regardless of its population. So this was another example of how this type of drawing of lines, basically, was done to support a certain power block. And actually, the Electoral College is something we'll be talking about coming up, and it is in our overview of all the reforms. So that's something we'll talk about at the end of the meeting a bit if we have time. So this idea of gerrymandering has gone on quite a while, and bipartisan gerrymandering has become, really just very commonplace. And the Supreme Court held in 1973 in Gaffney versus Cummings that bipartisan gerrymanders are constitutionally permissible under the Equal Protection Clause. And that clause says, it's part of the 14th Amendment, and it took effect in 1868. It provides that no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The primary motivation for this clause was to validate the equality provisions contained in the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which guaranteed that all people would have equal rights to those of all citizens. As a whole, the 14th Amendment marked a large shift in American constitutionalism by applying substantially more constitutional restrictions against the states that had applied before the Civil War. The meaning of the Equal Protection Clause has been the subject of much debate about racial segregation and the basis for many other decisions regarding discrimination. The Equal Protection Clause itself provides only to state and local governments. However, the Supreme Court held in Bowling versus Sharp in 1954 that equal protection requirements apply to the federal government as well through the due process of the Fifth Amendment. And so the Supreme Court, in different kinds of ways, sort of waded into the fray, but more from these kinds of positions of rights rather than the governing rules around elections. So we'll talk a little bit more about the Supreme Court in a minute. and where things stand that way. Some of the remedies for this problem of gerrymandering. There have been a lot of different remedies proposed, and basically people these days are trying to look at a lot of different ideas, and they're trying some different things out, from independent commissions made up of citizens to even more legal challenges to the Supreme Court to rein in how these lines can be drawn and support moving that direction. Some people are looking at proportional representation, which is like what they have in Australia, and looking at different voting methods that can support that type of greater choices. And we've got an idea that we're looking at as well that might be a variation on some of those things, but I kind of want to just go over some of the remedies. I will mention that the United States is alone among the major countries in that self-interested politicians govern the redistricting process. Various political and legal remedies have been used or proposed to diminish or prevent it. The neutral redistricting criteria is various constitutional and statutory provisions might compel a court to strike down a gerrymandered redistricting plan. And at the federal level, the Supreme Court has held that if a jurisdiction's redistricting plan violates the Equal Protection Clause or the Voting Rights Act, a federal court must order that jurisdiction to propose a new plan to remedy it. And if the jurisdiction fails to do so, then the court itself must draw up a plan to cure the violation. And in the Supreme Court case of Karcher versus Daggett in 1983, a New Jersey redistricting plan was overturned when it was found to be unconstitutional by violating the constitutional principle of one person, one vote. That's another clause from a Supreme Court decision. And despite the state claiming its unequal redistricting was done to preserve minority voting power, the court found no evidence to support that claim. Also at the state level, state courts may order or impose redistricting plans on jurisdictions where redistricting legislation prohibits gerrymandering. For example, in 2010, in Florida, adopted a two-state constitutional amendment, adopted two different state constitutional amendments that prohibit the Florida legislature from drawing redistricting plans that favor or disfavor any political party or incumbent. Those laws can come from ballot initiatives, like some of them have, or from the legislature. And other remedies or ways to impact in a positive way this situation have come by academia. A Tufts University professor has proposed the use of metric geometry to measure gerrymandering for forensic purposes for these cases that we've been talking about. And also at Duke University, there's a student project using math, statistics, data, computer models, etc., to try to resolve some of these, thorny issues. A lot of these links we will share with you both in our Facebook group and on our website. And Adria, if you scroll down a little bit further now, in this you'll see a map come up with a lot of states. Not that one, further down. There, that one. Some of these different remedies that people are trying, we'll kind of look at this map. And this is a map current after the 2010 census. And we have another census coming up in 2020 that everyone's eyeballing and looking at. So anyway, the legislatures control the redistricting laws in all of the yellow states. And independent commissions control the redistricting in the states that are green. And then there's just one state in purple, and that state has a nonpartisan staff that proposes the maps, but the state legislature votes on what they propose. And then the gray states actually have only one representative, so they really kind of are sort of immune from this problem. But rather than allowing more political influence, some states have shifted redistricting authority from politicians and given it to these nonpartisan redistricting commissions. And some of those states are Washington, Arizona, and California. And they've created standing committees for redistricting following the 2010 census. Rhode Island and the New Jersey Redistricting Commission have developed ad hoc committees, but developed the past two decennial reapportionments tied to new census data. And the Arizona State Legislature challenged the constitutionality of the use of a nonpartisan commission rather than the legislature for redistricting. And that's a Supreme Court case right now, Arizona State Legislature versus Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission. And the US Supreme Court in 2015 upheld that it was constitutional for Arizona to have this nonpartisan commission that was brought to them by the ballot. It was a citizen ballot initiative. And so that's actually still in kind of a going back and forth situation, but a little bit more about the Supreme Court. Over time, the court has done more about these drawing of the lines in a way that looks at the election process. They kind of got involved mostly because of the issues I mentioned before that were related to voting rights, that kind of thing, more so than the telling the states how to draw their lines and what to do in their electoral process. Those are definitely interrelated, but to some degree the court saw those as different issues. There was a lot of fuss in the early days of this about states' rights, particularly in the early history of the US, on this issue of Congress telling the states that they had to go to using districts instead of a statewide selection, which actually tends to be really even less representative than the districts. They moved to the districts because they had a lot of concern over the issues of minority representation and equal representation, that type of thing. So that was what the big battle was primarily, that ended up where all of our states essentially have the districting now over time. And but there is a way that they, I'll get back to the Supreme Court because I want to mention that, on this, there's a way that they do what's called packing and cracking. That's just sort of the terminology that's used to show how they draw these districts in a way that the little graph that kind of showed you before, the red, white, and blue graph. If you want to go back to that, Adria, that would be great. What they do is they look at how, back to the graph. They look at how it was kind of also a tussle of power between the rural areas and the more populated city areas. Those areas also today we can see have another layer of minorities going on, generally speaking, as well. And so there were a lot of different parts of the equation of balance of power. And certainly race was among one of the big things, the minorities of women and different ethnic minorities. So the packing would try to concentrate all of these particular, maybe a certain party or certainly, you know, the minority dynamics as well as a party into a smaller, compacted, it didn't necessarily look compact entirely, but they packed them into whatever the district looked like. And then they got other districts that were supposed to also have a similar balance with the population too. There are a lot of different criteria they're supposed to be looking at, but they would try to pack certain districts, and then they would try to do cracking of other districts, so divide those districts up in such a way that this power was either concentrated so that they would have end up with more seats, or it was broken so they would end up with more seats. So those are a couple of the tools that they would use to get this accomplished, and also why some of these districts look so crazy, which comes to some of the fixes, even from the Supreme Court as well, that and the federal, that we would have more compact districts as well. So right now there's quite a few cases that are ongoing with the Supreme Court. There's some on the partisan gerrymandering, there's some on the racial gerrymandering, and then there's some others like the Arizona case that doesn't necessarily fall into those categories. North Carolina is notable in that it has about a half a dozen different Supreme Court cases going on. Wisconsin, Maryland, let's see, Alabama and Arizona and Texas all have cases that haven't been decided as yet with the Supreme Court. We have a link on our Facebook group where you can easily look at that from the Brennan Center. A couple of links. Thanks, Joanne, for posting those. And you can learn more about what's going on right now with the Supreme Court. But the predominant voting system, so, you know, alternative voting systems are kind of one of the ways that people are looking at to try to impact this. And our predominant voting system is first past the post. And it requires the existence of the single member districts. In other words, it's not a populist type, or a, not populist, but a proportional representation. It's a single member representation based on the districts. Various alternatives are the district to the district based voting systems that don't rely on redistricting have been proposed that could maybe mitigate this. And one of those is, like I mentioned before, how they elect their representation in Australia, which is a proportional model. The UK is looking at that model as well. And this is where it sort of overlaps too with the system of how you cast your vote, how you mark your ballot. And so we're looking at that as well in our group called Casting and Counting Your Votes. And so that is a way of proposing a proportional representative model that would allow a choosing of several different multiple people, however the correct number is for the population, however many you would, your state would need to choose, and just having a different type of thing to eliminate the drawing of these districts and utilize a way of voting, which one of the things that they do use in Australia is the ranked choice voting. And that's one of the reasons some of the states are adopting that. There are some other voting methods that would be potentially easier to hand count as a backup method for our votes getting counted properly. And that's something we're looking at in the casting and counting your vote, all the different ways we could cast a ballot that could support this type of a system, the proportional representation, and also still be easy enough to hand count and actually ultimately have the end results we're trying to achieve, because there are some studies that say that some of these different voting methods actually don't really produce, at a certain point anyway, a different outcome than the first past the post system produces. And so we're looking at even the first past the post system, but qualifying it to be requiring a majority rather than just whoever wins. Whoever would win would have to win with a majority, at least 51%, or we would have an automatic runoff election, different than the ranked choice vote, which is also sometimes known as instant runoff election. So we're looking at a lot of different things there that you might be interested to see. And you could kind of get involved with that group, or just look at some of join us at some of our upcoming meetings discussing that. So these proportional voting systems would be one solution that people are looking at now, and various ways of how those might work. Also, again, the solutions some people are trying to put in place involve these independent commissions that would kind of take the gerrymander of the parties in power, you know, in the legislature, kind of take that imbalance away. So those are some of the remedies that are being proposed. Hello? Hello? Hello?
There's Dr. Ted.
Hi, Ted. Hello? Did someone say they couldn't hear anything? Adria, are you on?
This is Kate. I'm on. I can hear.
Okay. Well, I guess I will ask if we have any questions, because there are a lot of different systems, and we are kind of proposing, or at least looking at the idea of possibly a proportional representation type of a system that might look at the data of the minorities, the different votes, and propose candidates that would that might be able to well, just let any candidate run on the way that we have an equal playing field with how we design the rest of our aspects of providing what we have to do in terms of leveling the playing field and giving everyone an equal voice and equal time. I don't know if Ted can hear us. Ted, can you hear us? I think not. I'm going to try to see if I can help Ted to Ted, can you hear us? We can hear you.
I can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. Great. I just wasn't sure if we could hear, if you were on or not. Ted is our other presenter. So I would like to just say that there are some different remedies, and we've looked at some of the status with the Supreme Court, and really this is a giant long-term
unbelievable
and a push-pull, so to speak. So I'm wondering if there are any questions, and if not, I could.
No sound is all my fault.
Pardon? Okay. Let's see here. I don't know.
Oh,
I do have a question, Malta. Has there been any court cases where gerrymandering now has been sort of straightened out? I mean, this whole issue seems to be corrupting our elections each and every year at a greater and more devious degree.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, has there been a state that's had any luck in changing this and straightening it out and making it far fairer?
Yeah. The things that people are doing right now that seems to be the most effective, it kind of goes back to that little map I was showing you, are these independent commissions. And that seems to be one of the things that is helping. But to actually feel that hasn't really been in place long enough for people to really know if that's going to be as effective as need be. So the track record on that is not lengthy. It's relatively new overall. And so, of course, these district redrawing, events happen every 10 years. And that's why there's such a history. If you try to dig into the history, it begins to be overwhelming because it's got a lot of things
hi,
going on.
Ray, I got it.
And so anyway, that's one of the things that's the most promising that's actually been activated. The other thing that is the other thing they're considering is the going this proportional representation route, and that's even newer, and there aren't any states that I'm aware of that actually have activated that yet. So I don't think that there's a lot of change right now that we can expect unless we get a good plan in place that will actually solve this problem. So we are looking right now at, either the independent commission route, or we're looking at also the proportional representation route and maybe a variation of that, which would, we're looking at what some other people have written. I do know there is some language actually out of the state of Missouri that I'm looking into right now to see if we would like that language or some version of it. I don't know. The only thing people can do right now really is the ballot initiative, the direct democracy. And that's what this is looking at too. Missouri does have a ballot initiative. At any rate, you can learn more about what states have that on the website, have the ballot initiative. And the other thing would be just kind of different variations or versions of this proportional representation. The other thing too, people think is once they just instigate the voting mechanism of the ranked choice vote, they think that effectively kind of establishes that proportional representation. So that's a factor that we're looking at. So there's one state, Maine, who as a state has ranked choice voting right now. Otherwise, it's locales that have that. And that's kind of experimental too, actually, for us anyway. And the one thing about that particular method is that it produce a better, more balanced outcome, but also still not be so difficult to hand count that another way of verifying that we're getting fair and honest elections is to be able to hand count a certain number of ballots, if not all of them, hopefully. A lot of people would like to see 100% hand count. So even if we have along with the technology that counts, in a more quick fashion, so using both basically. And some of the voting methods are more difficult to hand count than others. So that's a factor that we're looking at that would kind of play into this. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's about as good an answer as I know right now.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it does.
And I don't know if anyone has any other questions right now before before we go on to the next part of our meeting. I do want to, if anyone has any questions, you can, if you think of some later, you can write them into the chat. Just hover over the lower part of the screen. And right now, since we don't have any other questions being expressed verbally right now, we'll go ahead and move on to the second part of our meeting, which is about the voter concerns and the voter issues. And so we have a group dealing with voter concerns that has been working with about maybe close to a handful of us since for a while now, actually. And Ted Schlechter, Dr. Ted, he's a PhD in psychology from Louisville, Kentucky, is going to present as our chair of that group right now this evening. And I want to give you a little bit of background. I would call Ted a very big politico type of, some of our members are and some of us aren't. We're just kind of different variations of that. But in 2008 and 2010, Ted worked on the Democratic Senate Committee campaign as an advisor to the director of the DSCC on poll data concerning the U.S. senatorial campaigns. And in the fall and winter of 2007 and 2008, Ted was a big player with Team Hillary in Kentucky. And I'm just kind of hitting some of the highlights because I would be a while introducing him. But in 2002, he was involved with the Democratic coordinated campaign in Jefferson County, again in Kentucky. And in 2001, he co-chaired a voter march in Louisville. So he's been very active in voter issues. In 1972, he chaired the John Lindsay presidential campaign in Kansas and Missouri. And his work is right now currently at the Jefferson Community College as an adjunct instructor. And he has done campaign field work as early as the 1990s. He's listed in contemporary authors and is a member of the Phi Delta Kappa Pi Delta Kappa Honor Society. And so as chair of our voters' concerns, we'll welcome Ted to take the floor. And Adria, if you can help with the PowerPoint that Ted sent us, we can let Ted, you can tell us when you want us to change the slides for you, and I'm gonna let you take it away.
Okay, I can't see myself, but.
Well, we can hear you and we can see the slides.
Okay, and do you have the other, the whole list of stuff that we have?
I can pull it up. I don't have it, but I can pull it up.
Good, well, let me just say hi, welcome. I have been a political, I have been burned by the Democratic Party. I know about the Democratic Party. And actually, one of my good friends was J.B. Porsche, who was the head of the D.C. Democratic Senate Campaign Committee. So I know a lot about that working. And I want to start off with a kind of a grim view. I really believe that it's been a 30 to 35 year right-wing conspiracy to take over the voting in America. I really, really believe it. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe in conspiracy, but I really believe that. Go to the next slide, please.
Definitely agree. That's why I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, it's the United States of democracy, and I would probably say no.
Nope, it's not.
I mean, in democracy, if you go to the next slide, you have voting, you have voter rights, you don't have voting, you have voting choices, you have representation, you have participants on everybody, and you don't have voter suppression. So this has been 40 years, I believe, in the making. I think it's also a religious coalition and other things, but it's going to take us, and I want to be grim, because I really believe it's going to be taking us 40 years to get it straight. I mean, I don't think it's going to take, maybe not 40 years, but it's going to take a lot of time. As President Kennedy said, we're not going to do it overnight or during the next 10 years, but let us begin the process. So is there, what?
Yes.
Okay. So
You're here.
Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. These are the bullet points that we have talked about. This is our quest. As you can see, Mr. Don Quixote, or Little Don Quixote, because we're starting off small and we're starting off with the weapons against us. We have our little tiny sword where they control everything. They have all the bombardments. They control the justices. They control state legislatures. They control the voting process. And whoever controls the voting process controls the election. So this is, our quest is to reform the voter. It's to reform. Can you put on please put on our slide, which we have our draft.
I will send this draft to Adria because I didn't send the draft to her. Let me just send that right now. Would you like, I didn't know, I thought you might have the draft with your documents, but.
I do, I just don't know how to put them up. I mean, I could put them up.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just send this draft to her really fast then, and
okay.
you can get it in the email. And
I can make him a co-host, and then he could put it up if you know how.
you can do that right quick anyway, but I'll still try to send it to you just in case that might
Sorry, my wife and I are moving from one apartment to another, and I'm grading papers, so I should have put them all up. And I had Torah studies today, so it's been a big day.
Don't worry. We'll quickly get that done here.
But it's amazing how the right wing has just taken over the voting process. I mean, you can't, and we gotta be firm. We have to be united. We have to be patient, and we can't expect to do it in one day. There's too many vested interests, from the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, to the people in power. They're not going to give it up easily. They're not going to give it up just right now. It's going to take time, effort, unity, and a good plan. Sorry to speak. I do teach. You got it?
Did you make him a,
Yeah, I did.
did you make him a co-host?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get this loaded up in the email and sent out.
Okay, where do I pick it up, in the email?
Well, I'll put you on the email list as well.
Well,
Oh, okay.
if you have it open, you can just hit share screen at the bottom.
Oh.
Share screen. Okay, I got it. Okay, and what do you want me to hit now?
Whichever window it is that you want to share.
I just don't see I see the latest Trump release.
Do you have it open on your computer?
I see launch meeting.
You have to have the document open in order to share it. So,
Okay.
Adria, check your email. Maybe you can open it there. Yes, Ted, I want to thank you. Ted left a meeting earlier with all the things he just described and left it early to come and join us to help give this presentation. So I know it's been a hectic day for you, and thanks a lot. Adria, did you see in your email, I just sent that to you in case you could open it up and just bring it on yourself.
It hasn't come through yet.
Okay.
Okay, well, the first thing, I'll just read it. The first thing is, the purpose of this reform for voters is to establish fair, transparent, secure, verifiable procedures for all future elections. These procedures deal with who votes, how to register, and the need for a more open system for general and primary elections. Okay, on the first bullet, reform voter ID. I know this is going to be one that everybody screams about and talks about because a lot of us don't want it, a lot of us really don't want it, and a lot of us really, really don't want it, but according to the laws of the land, you have to have some kind of voter ID. So what we're trying to do is every United States citizen 18 years of age and older will be allowed to vote in any election, will be automatically registered. And when they register, they'll be registered as an NPP, no party preference. When the day, okay, and we'll be sent official notice with a voter card. Does everybody have that? Are we together?
So did you say that they would be automatically registered?
Yes.
Okay, at the age of 18, under
Right.
no party preference.
No party preference.
Yeah,
Automatic
it would be-
registering.
Okay.
I mean, some countries do that already right now. Okay. Let me get the whole. Let's see. I can only see Monty on this thing.
Do you want, if you want me to intervene in any way, let me know other than what I've done.
Okay. Okay, the next bullet point is saying registering to vote. Voters can register in person or online themselves and check on automatic registration for completeness and accuracy. If one finds one is not registered or there are registration and inaccuracy, one that can then register and or correct inaccuracies, change party affiliation, etc., etc., and indeed, or do it at the polling place on election day. Any questions about that? Okay. As we said before, automatically registered voters are initially set up as NPPs, but can then change this to a party of the voter's choosing. A voter may change the, okay, that's B. C, a voter may change their party. Okay, D, it will not be necessary to change from B option to ask for the ballot of their choosing as they're polling at their polling stations. NPP voters do have the option to be identified with a specific party affiliation if they chose. Okay.
And when they do that, their ballots won't be provisional ballots. They'll be counted like.
Yeah, we're not talking about any provisional ballots.
Right.
Okay. E, obtain a screenshot, printout, stub, or other traditional carbon copy receipts of your accurate voting registration when registering, updating or correcting your registration online or in person. Save this to be brought with you each time you vote or until you have an automatically issued else fails, and provide any undue hardship. You may sign an affidavit as to your identity. Now, I'm a real big fan of having people sign affidavits and using a signature block as a way of. Conversely, you can use the official voter registration card where you will receive immediately in person or by mail and registering and changing registration information online at the offices established for this purpose or when voting at the polls. There will be a free voter ID if in person or a non-voter ID. Either one is acceptable, and to be replaced with a free voter ID, okay. G, the Secretary of State office should send letters automatically to registered voters say they are registered as an NPP. H, students provide photo IDs as well as non-voter voter cards available to made at the polls once ID is established in approved ways. We'll talk about this later. Okay, that is the first, or should I say the second, back up as needed license. State photo ID, school ID or school registration. We had in the previous elections, a lot of college students weren't able to vote because they couldn't go home to vote because of classes, and they were not allowed to vote on the campus because they're not legal residents of that area. So that's a real issue here, and we really believe that could be done by school ID. Birth certification, I don't know where mine is, voter registration card, state or federal government ID, bank statement, bank credit, debit card, utility bill, residential mortgage or regular account, or a sworn affidavit of voter ID. Do I hear any comments, questions on this particular part? I'm going to stop right now so we could talk about this more.
I like it.
And the voter identity is just to say that you just say that, yes, I'm who I say I am, and I'm a citizen. So when you register, you just prove that. Afterwards, your signature can, be your signature mark can, when you go in to register to vote and you sign up in the poll books and they see that your name is there, you can either take some form of this if you want, any of those things, but as well, you can have your signature mark, it would be on this list. Your ability to sign an affidavit as to who you are would be on this list of possible. All you have to do is fulfill one of these things. And also this voter card, either with or without a photo that should have been sent to you, can be used. And also you can get, if you wish, a photo ID right then and there. If you don't have one, that would be both a photo or a non-photo voter registration card as to your choice would be available for you. And we would make that available at the poll so they could get their photos right there if they wanted such a thing. Because sometimes a photo ID card of some sort, even if it's this voter card, might help them in their life in other ways, who knows. But any of these things could be used. And again, yes, we're open to comments and tweaking, and you're certainly welcome to join the voter concerns group or the group working on the gerrymandering or any of these things. If you want to give some input, we hope that you do. So I'm going to stop talking and let others.
Okay, what are some of the comments or feelings, or if we put everybody to sleep on the vote? I think it should be on your screen now so you can see it. Is there any questions? Hello?
The only concern I have, this is Kate, is, there's such a talk of voter fraud, which we know is not frequent, it's very rare. But if you've got people, coming in with the water bill or whatever for, to create an ID right at the polling place, it seems that some might have a real problem with that. Because the same type, it seems like it could be appear to be a little flimsy in terms of identifying that person to create an ID. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think the state of Vermont or Maine allows the utility bill, and that's why this is on this list. But that is a good point, especially I live in Kentucky, and they would be very, very hesitant to do that, especially with the new Republican right we have here. So yes, utility bill will be difficult to get in some states.
And to both of your points there, there is just out today, I'll post it on our group, an article, I think I sent it to you, Ted, about what's going on in Texas in this very area, because they were ordered to become more compliant with this Voting Rights Act and the ID and all of that. And so they were trying to kind of strike a balance, which is what you're talking about right now, as to what would be acceptable. And I'll post that for our group to read what they're doing, because they're doing some of the things that we're talking about.
Now, I think, is there another comment coming? Go on.
One more little bit on the utility bill. I guess people think that, or the credit cards or bank statements, I guess people think that if you can show that, you know, you're the person that that bill is assigned to, while it might not actually, all of these say that you're a citizen, they do seem to figure you're probably not going to be paying something for somebody else. On the other hand, I certainly understand what you're saying.
Now, the thing that really threw people in Wisconsin, I hope you can see me, it's this state photo ID. That's really what, I mean, like they claim that there may be hundreds or 200,000 people who couldn't vote in Ohio, in Wisconsin, because they did not have a current state photo ID. So we're looking for other means that will satisfy the Republicans in who, we got to get it past state legislatures, and maybe a sworn affidavit of voter ID would suffice. Are there any comments about that?
I think the photo ID is probably more viable than some of the other things you suggested.
Now,
even with all of, go on.
Ted,
why, Kate?
Because, like, for example, what I think of is if a person can just take their utility bill in, or any number of things, you could have, I mean, not to say it would happen, but this would be the argument, that you could have several people going in with various utility bills in various precincts and voting with that information in hand. If you've got a visual ID of what that person looks like, that type of fraud is unlikely to happen.
Now, how would you do the state photo ID with a lot of people who don't drive? How would you?
I know that's a problem. I get it, but I'm poking a hole in it, because for those people who make a big deal out of voter fraud.
Yeah, this is good discussion we need. So keep kicking. It's good to kick the tires.
What would be your compromise situation?
I think that voters might have to be responsible to get some form of photo ID in order to go in on the day of election and vote if they haven't registered. You know what I'm saying? They might have to take the responsibility to show up with some form of picture ID that is acceptable.
Okay. Could it be that another thing is that the state takes pictures of people at the voting poll?
Exactly. Well, yeah, you could do that, but how can you guard against having Judy Smith with that utility bill in various precincts that might look different? You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, it's very iffy to me if you've got people who are worried about
Well, we could maybe take off the utility bill thing, because the thing that is in the language that we have to comply with is it cannot be undue hardship. And so if utility bill is something that we have hesitancies about, or we should look over the list, whatever else is that we want to put into a questionable category, we could certainly
let's go over the list. Let's go over the list one more time.
Because
one of the things we have a a social security card now. So everybody have a social security card ready and available.
Right, and that's not a picture ID, but that would be much harder to, well, maybe, I don't know if you could, you know, create one.
It doesn't actually, social security card does not have your your address in it, does it?
No, and it doesn't have a picture. At least the one I have doesn't.
Okay, how about a school ID?
That I think would be fine because that usually involves a picture.
State driver's license.
Yes.
A birth certificate we could eliminate. Voter registration card with ID.
Well, the other thought would be to have 2 or 3 forms of ID. You could come in with your birth certificate and your utility bill. You know what I mean? Something that would give you a current address, as well as, you know, I mean, there aren't that many birth certificates around. I guess you could create a fraudulent one, but if you've got, you know, 2 or 3 IDs that would line up and put you on the map, then that might be one way to get around it.
Well, that's a good idea. That's a great idea.
That is a good idea, that people could, they only have to produce, well, see, we have to write it in a certain tight way. So if they only have to produce one of these things, then we might have to make sure that any one that they produce is then acceptable. However, if we write it a different way, then maybe multiple things could bundle together to provide, you know, the
what could be written is an acceptable ID, because it doesn't, the ID, photo ID, because it does not have to have your license, your address once. I once used a employee ID card that did not have my address. So any kind of ID, one, or a combination of bank statement, utility bill, or something like that. So
that
it could be,
work.
That would work. Okay, that does work.
And I want to make sure that we're all clear. There's 2 things with identification, and that is the registration in the very beginning when you're registered, which for most people will happen before they show up at the poll, but they can register at the poll as well and change their, you know, no party preference or any other thing, the no party preference before they vote. And if they're already a party and they want to change it to a different party other than no party preference on their way out of voting, because that has to do with something further down on our list, the open primary conversation. But we're talking about 2 things: registration to vote, period.
Right.
We want to make sure that those people are citizens, and the affidavit applies with that also. That would also be subject to a pretty strong penalty, Kate, to deter some of what the concerns, you know, that we're discussing. So that, and the other thing, when you do finally have the signature mark, that would be another way that if your signature matches, you can simply use your signature match. That's something we've discussed that would be adequate.
Okay, or anybody else, what do you think of a signature match?
That might work. I don't know.
Who else is in the, I can't find out who else is in the room. Is Ron still there?
Ron and Joanne, we can't hear you if you're speaking, either of you.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
We can hear you, Joanne, now.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
Oh, no, I was just thinking, I would like to look at another state, like the state amendments probably, or whatever, the statutes about registration at different states that might have in there the utility bill or the
Vermont has it.
Yeah, Vermont has it.
One of the people that was in our working group was, well, 2 of them were actually from Vermont. But Certainly looking at other states is good, and that's one reason I mentioned, you know, what Texas is doing that's trying to bring them into, you know, greater compliance.
I'll never stop.
My dog's starting to bark.
Sir, anybody else with an I'm trying to get to the my Google and see what?
How do they overcome the utility bill? Is that a single thing that they require?
Let me look for what Vermont has. If I could go to my Google.
What is your question, Joanne? How do they overcome what Vermont has?
Do they just bring you utility bills? Is that the only thing they have to identify?
Yes, that's all they have to bring. That's one thing that is considered acceptable by Vermont.
Okay.
Because Vermont's thinking is that if you can have a utility bill, I guess people could go and steal other people's utility bills, to Kate's concern here. And the utility bill will have an address, a mailing address on it. And you know, have to be responsible to pay that bill. So it's unlikely someone's going to be paying it for you in most cases. So people apparently in Vermont felt that it was acceptable for them to use as a form of ID when just signing in to vote. Not
okay. I'm just looking at, I don't know how to send this Google around on this stuff, but there's the National Council of State Legislatures. It's www.ncsl.org.
Right.
They have a page there, and let's see what some of the states are. Alaska, you need an official voter registration card, a driver's license, birth certificate, passport, hunting or fishing license, a current utility bill, bank statement, paycheck, government check, or any government document with the voter's name and address. So that's Alaska. And in
We forgot passport. We put that on there.
Arizona has bank or credit union statement dated within 90 days of the election.
Oh.
And they also have vehicle insurance card.
Oh.
So there's other states that do not have, you know, these are, I'm looking at this one. This is Arkansas. Proof of identity that complies may include without limitation. I'm laughing because it's Arkansas in the South. A concealed handgun carrying license. So an employee badge or identification document. Now that's true in Kentucky because I once voted on that. A U.S. military ID card, a student ID, a public assistant ID, a voter ID. So those are some of the things that are happening throughout the United States. Delaware, utility bill, paycheck. The utility bill, it seems to be a lot of places.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can expand our list and we can think about that. That's why we're presenting now, you know, so that we can get feedback and kick the tires here.
Yeah, and now this is interesting because we always think, don't think about our Native Americans, but in several states, tribal ID card, including a photograph, is acceptable. So several states use the tribal ID card as a acceptable
ID.
Mm-hmm. And here's one from Arizona, Indian census card. It's not even just a picture ID. So picture ID is it's not necessarily so. You need a picture ID in every state, and even some of these red states that don't require picture ID.
This is Ronnie.
Okay, yes. Hi, Ron.
Hi. I think these all are basically methods of different agencies and organizations vetting the person that is presenting the type of ID. The problem that I have read about in recent elections is, what about the people access to any of these vetting processes, how can we deal with those people who may not have a residence, for instance, but they're valid voters. They have no driver's license. They might not have a utility bill. They wouldn't have a bank statement. Their birth certificate is questionable. I think that the problem with the U.S. voting process right now is that those people fall through the cracks and are treated less than citizens. So there is something in the process that needs to change so that they have a method that's inexpensive and is as easy as possible.
Ron, I think you hit the, I'm sorry, I don't know if you're done or not. It's hard for me to hear you at times. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I really think that was the problem in the last election. Many people were turned away because they did not have access to a lot of these things, but yet they were viable voters.
Well, our solution is to have the affidavit that you can do when registering or when showing up at the poll to vote. Either way, you can simply sign a sworn affidavit that you are who you say you are and that you are a citizen, and that will allow you to register to vote. It will also allow you to, and at which time you should be given this card, but say you lose it or whatever. And that would be free. And if you need to just go to the poll and register there with the same sworn affidavit, you can do that, and you can get a voter card there if you want to make some aspects of your life easier, or not. Skip the card and you'll have your signature match for future elections. Or you know, you can still use this sworn voter ID even just at the voting process itself on the day of.
Ron,
Is that something that would work?
Ron, what would be your suggestion? What do you favor?
Well, one thing that I have been thinking of recently, and not enough to really put into very clear words, but it's just an idea. And I don't want to spend a lot of time tonight talking about it, but something to think about, is that a lot of people that are in these situations do encounter certain issues. And with the number of people that now have smartphones with cameras, and they're visiting people that are indigent or have no place to stay, or are viable voters but have no access to a vetting thing, to a vetting. If they encounter a person and that person can vote, it would be nice if there was a system where they could take a snapshot of this person because they know who they are, send it into a voter, get that person almost immediately, and because they would be contacting them on an ongoing basis. It's just something to think about.
I think it's I'm sorry, you're fading in and out of my machine, so I may be stepping on you. I apologize. I think that's an excellent idea. I think it's a great idea. If you were in my class, I would give you 3 points, extra bonus points, and please write it up.
Okay.
Yeah,
and send it to us, because I think that's an excellent idea. Excellent.
If I don't do it on the chat, I will do it in another way.
Yeah, that's good, because your speaker somehow is kind of going in and out. I don't hear you all the time either. Okay. So thank you for sharing it as in and out.
That's a great idea. I mean, I really do. Okay.
Yeah. Anyone else have any other comments while we're on this part?
Okay, my screen share. Okay, let me get back to my screen share. Okay. Okay, is there any other, Kate, are you?
I'm with you, and I like the idea. I like the idea of being able to take a picture with your phone at the polling place.
I think that's a wonderful idea. Or how about even before that?
Right. Well, that too, maybe. I think having someone witness it is even better.
Yes, I agree.
We had I'd like to just conclude that we had originally planned that we would put in place the state would require, however they did it, to provide a photo voter card right there at the poll. And but it could, like Ted said, and others, maybe be done even, different ways than before as well.
I think that what appeals to me about Ron's idea is that it's thinking beyond the traditional box, and it's using 21st century technology to stop this voter suppression thing. And I think I really like it. Is there any other? I don't know who else is on the line. Anybody else have any comments?
I guess we're ready for the next.
Okay, the next big issue is voter records. And this is really tricky because it's by law, by the 2003 Federal Reform Act, each Secretary of State must keep current records of who's available to vote. Now, the question is, of course, you hear all the time about dead people voting and all this stuff, which is not true. It did not happen. But indeed, the Republicans have used something called cross-check. Have people heard of this cross-check system?
Yes.
Okay, the cross-check is done. It was actually done started in my home state by the Secretary of State before the fascist Secretary of State. But what they're doing is having an interstate voter registration cross-check program in 16 or 17 states, and they're trying to eliminate people because of duplicate names. And the duplicate names certainly affect minorities because, indeed, minorities are more likely to have junior and senior bias. So we're looking at ways of having the Secretary of State maintain the records, because they have to maintain voter records by the 2003 Federal Reform Act. And there are three aspects of maintaining records. One, you have to do it between each election. Now, Monta thinks that they should do it every 6 months, but some states do not have elections every year. Kentucky does not have a voting election every year. So the question is, how much time in between should the records be current? Secondly, the voter data belongs to the public. It should not be something that is indeed outsourced for private companies, but yet both parties, the Republicans and Democrats, have their own databases. One is called BAN. That's the Democratic one, started by Obama in 2008, and the Republicans have their voter database. This is also in with the Secretary of State. So there's about 3 or 4 voter databases that are flying around America, probably more than that, 6 or 7 at any time. And yes, it can be hacked. They think maybe 90 million of them have been hacked at one time or another. So this is a real issue, but the issue again is what's mandated by the federal government. Also, these voter registrations, these voter databases, not only have your name, your address, which is fine. They also have how many times you voted in the last 5 elections, which is fine. They also have your addresses on them and your date of birth. Now, with all those pieces of information, especially the date of birth, your privacy it's just gone. They could do anything, these hackers could do anything possible with the date of birth, your name and date of birth, and they could get any record that you have. So one of the things we want to propose is that they eliminate date of birth from the databases. By the way, on Facebook, do not put your real date of birth. My wife is continuously warning me about that, because indeed with that, they can hack they can find your social security number, a whole bunch of other things. So, okay, we have to have a database. We believe that the database should be in the hands only of the Secretary of State. I don't know what the governments are going to do, about the parties are going to do. And people should be aware that they've been purged or eliminated in some way, shape, or form. It should be publicized, such as they publicize people who do not do spousal, not spousal, but do not do, what is it, child support payment. So this is on this thing is maintaining voter records. Are there any comments or criticisms or witticisms or anything isms about that? Kate?
I'm wondering, is there a legitimate reason for people to be purged en masse off the voter rolls at all?
Yeah, the legitimate reasons are that indeed they're saying, the Kansas Secretary of State people are saying, well, you get all these people who are going from state to state. That's how it really started with this interstate check system, the cross check. There's no evidence of that, but that's what they claim.
Well, we actually, in what we're proposing, have in this voter records section, we're proposing that they keep records by adding people at the age of 18. They keep records by eliminating people based on death records. So purging people, use the term that way.
I hate the word to use purge, but okay.
And the difficult part is the moving. Moving around in a state isn't such a big deal, but it does have an impact to some degree. Moving out of state is a problem because it is hard to keep track of people moving. We're not suggesting a way except for trying to, have we need to brainstorm, is there a way to deal with that? Otherwise, we're not eliminating people. We're adding when they come on, when they're 18 years old and automatically register, and we're eliminating them, with death records. Those are the only two things we've proposed so far, unless someone comes up with a good idea for moving that's not too, privacy related or any of that. We also thought some of the requirements of, that Ted was talking about, the birth date and whatever, that whatever was required to register to vote could be discussed at this time. But also, yes, other than the hacking, the fact that these are public records, publicly owned, and no party has any access to any of them other than the way any other public citizen would have access. And that access would not include an address. It would not include a signature that would be on file. It would not include a birth date if that were on there. It would not include those things, but a birth date could potentially be on there, or at least have to be proven at the beginning that you're 18 or over, whether it's included on there or not. We don't have to have it.
I could talk the pro on these databases and being out there by privately owned people. Because if you go to Google and look up VAN, Voter Activation Network, they say it's a very good idea for progressives, grassroots people, to have an idea who to vote, where to get your votes. So there is it's not, nothing is all pro or all con. It's how do you set it up so that you can't do a cross-check anymore? So you eliminate people because they have the same last name. Because the system is not, the computer system has false hits. So we have to have a standardized computer system that has as little false hits as possible. Okay, Kate. I'm just going to go by where I see people. Miss Ross, I haven't seen you talk.
Oh, I just asked about the purging.
Oh, Miss Ross did?
Yeah, that's me, Adria.
Okay, what'd you ask? I'm sorry.
I
Okay,
asked
go
if
on.
there was a legitimate reason for people in.
Oh, you were the one who asked that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is Kate again. I have, this brings up some thoughts and concerns about the security of the data of the voters, because I mean, we in this group are very concerned about the way the vote is cast and the way that information is passed and the security of all that. But we haven't really delved into the security of the voter information. And
Right. This is
I think
talking about that.
I think that's something that we need to build into it, because of some of the things that happened with Bernie Sanders people, and all of this cross-check, all this craziness that's going on within the the voter data. And I haven't even really thought about that. Monta, have you?
Well, we've been thinking about it in this group some, yes.
Uh-huh.
Mr. Ron, what do you think about this? You have a technological, Ron?
There is, the only problem I see with this, talking about a centralized database, and there's so many legal challenges to that now. The problem, I mean, it's going to be a way of someone somewhere keeping track of everybody. I think all sorts of pushback on that.
I'm sorry, you're coming in and out. I can't hear you very well.
The problem I see is that if you do any kind of a consistent database, it's going to have to be one database or one copy of database, central source of information, and there's going to be all sorts of social pushback against that, probably legal pushback against that. Really would be good, but I don't think that through several decades of, that people wanted to do something similar at the state level. It got so much pushback from the voters. We may have to look for a different type of solution, but I don't have that off the top of my head.
Now the problem, a lot of this again is mandated by the 2003 Federal Reform Act, and they say again, it's the problem with you have to have these databases by law. So I don't know. Linda Larkin, if you have any thoughts? Okay. Anybody else, Ms. Woods, or anybody else?
Talking about this last night with the newly elected county recorder we have, because there are still voters that want to be able to check that their own ballot, a ballot that finally gets counted, and they want to look at it again and make sure that it hasn't been changed. It was just like they put it. But then he said, well, it's a secret ballot, so you're not going to get to see your ballot after it's cast. So I don't think that any voter identification would be an issue because they keep the ballot secret. That's all. So it's kind of frustrating.
Well, voter identification, I think, is what different parties, the different power blocks are concerned about. That two things, it's really a ruse for voter suppression, I believe, more than anything. But besides that, if you don't think that, then you don't want, people who aren't citizens voting, and that who at the very bottom line at least are willing to sign an affidavit that they are who they say they are if they don't have a way to ID themselves, and that they are a citizen if they don't have a way to prove that they're a citizen, and have some consequences if they're lying, you know, on the affidavit signature.
Yes, sir. I heard a voice.
Mhm.
Any other comments on maintaining? Okay, the last issue. Now I'm getting feedback on mine. Is open primaries. Open election primaries. Okay. Now, as a hardened political party person, being a hardened Democrat and being part of the process, and being part of Kentucky, I can see where Mitch McConnell would just love open primaries and get some real reactionary Democrats to run in the primary and upset the apple cart. Now, being from Kentucky, with Mitch, knowing Mitch, he will do anything possible, like to destroy the Democratic chances, or vice versa. Maybe a Democrat would do that to Republican. So totally open primaries is a very tricky, even though it's ideally for people like it, it's a tricky wicket. So what we're trying to do is limit open election primaries to NPP, non-partisan people who indeed say that they are non-political, they have not established a political party. So indeed, they can have a choice when it comes to the election. But if you're a registered Democrat and you've been registered and you do not change up to 2 weeks before the election day, then you have to have the Democratic ballot. Same thing with the Republicans. So we're talking about really a hybrid between open elections and keeping some of the shenanigans that some people may do down to a minimum. So that's the last point, open elections. Any questions? Comments?
Basically through either open elections or even, you know, a different voting type of method. I feel like I'm getting feedback. I'm going to be quiet here. Hello?
I'm not getting any.
Well, I was trying to say, and I'm not getting any feedback now, maybe I'll continue, that with the open primary, with what we were talking about earlier, the gerrymandering, with this whole thing around voter suppression, basically, and all of this, you know, the whole process is so power-driven and, you know, corrupt in every way, and everything you do can have some type of gaming, it seems like,
Yes.
by those who are willing to find a way to game it. And so definitely there are people who have concerns about the open primary in that regard because of what you just said, that, you know, people would technically organize their members to go and vote for a weak candidate that they'd like to face off with, you know, in the general or whatever. That's certainly, you know, not beyond a realm of possibility. I know that I live in Missouri. It's an open primary state, and I can't really tell you what the effects of that have been because, and I don't know when it became that. I should probably do some research on that in this state. But maybe the states that we could do a little more research, if anyone would want to help, that'd be great. But on the states that have open primaries and what they were like before they became an open primary state in terms of the makeup of their, you know, representation and sort of their demographics, those kinds of research pieces. Maybe we could even get, some college students, Ted, that would want to take this on. Of course, you're in psychology. Maybe we need math students. But anyway, it's just, it's hard to know what the real impact of the open primary is. But in the state of California, everyone was like, open the primary, It was like, okay. For all the reasons that was going on. Kate and Adria, you guys might want to weigh in a little more from
Yeah, I wanted to see how you define an open primary, because this question was asked of Padilla in California, and he hemmed and hawed, and finally he said, it means it's open to whoever wants to run. He was not talking about open to the voters. Well, and I think he was basically somehow masking the truth of that question,
Well,
anyway.
How's the in California, how has the new system worked?
Very poorly. And I think that according to our Constitution, it is supposed to be an open primary, but it was definitely not an open primary. They did everything with the no party preference ballots and the way all that happened to make it almost impossible for, first-time voters to vote in any way that counted.
And beyond that, they also confused people regarding the American Independent Party and the independent no party preference option. So a lot of people signed up, for the wrong party and then didn't get to vote also.
Right.
That was just for the presidential primary, right? It wasn't for the down ballots.
It was for
it was for everything.
The primary.
There were other. I think there were other things on the ballot as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would you suggest? There's people out there about over primaries and stuff.
This is Ronnie. I would like to make one suggestion, or at least open up a thought process. If a person votes in an open primary, they will be voting for someone within the party. If they vote in the open primary for a party, then they are forced to vote in the party too. That might prevent them from throwing their vote to a weak candidate on the opposite side because they're throwing their vote away on their side at the same time.
Well, there's all kinds of ways it can go back and forth. And I'm hearing you going in and out a lot, Ron, so I hope you were through and I didn't cut you off. Yeah, it's not an easy way to figure out what's best, to be perfectly honest, but at least the way we wrote it is that the no party preference are essentially independent of a party, and the independents who are independent of a party, given what Adria was saying about the party that has independent in its name, that therefore they're actually a party rather than an independent. But anyway, for these people that are not affiliated with a party, I think it is certainly fair, and we have it written, that they get to vote in any primary on whatever ballot they want, and it will count. They're not given a provisional ballot, as we said earlier. No provisionals anywhere in this writing at this point.
Well, I like the point about the American Independent Party is an interesting one. Andrea, do they have a presidential primary? Could you vote in the presidential primary for some candidate?
That I don't know, but I do know that in California, Trump was running under both parties, under the American Independent Party and also under the Republican Party.
Wow, I don't think that's legal.
I don't know about that, but I mean, he had therefore 110 electoral candidates, rather than the 55 for California that the rest of, I mean, obviously only, they would go only if he won for that party, but I'm not sure how all that works.
He was on two, well,
Yeah, he ran at 2 different parties.
I think technically I think that is legal because they used to be able to do that in the state of New York. In fact, you can when they had the Liberal Party.
Okay.
It probably depends on the state.
So what would I'm hearing a lot of anecdotal information, but what is the feeling of the group with regards to open primaries?
I still want to know the definition because, you know, I get that there's some petition about.
Hello?
California.
You're going out, Kate. We can't hear you. But to your point, because we still can't hear you.
Okay, give me a definition of open primary. I mean,
Oh,
I'm going to say maybe my definition is slanted because they do have political background. What would be your definition of open primary? I mean, I think that's a good point. We have to define it first.
Well, we actually have maybe an unwritten definition, and the definition that was intended when this was sort of thrown out into our group was what people think of, not what Padilla thinks of, that the open primary in this case is talking about voters, not who's going to have access to the ballot as a candidate. That's a different matter.
Yeah, we're throwing that away.
Being able to vote in an open primary, this part. The open primary as regards candidates running would come in some other area. And it wouldn't even be called an open primary. It would just be called, I don't know, all candidates would have access, basically.
Okay, who's talking? I have trouble.
That was Monta.
Okay, Kate, are you back?
I'm here, but I'm getting in my car and I'm going to be driving, and I think that my connection will be spotty. So I don't know how much I'll be able to hear and talk.
Send us a definition of your definition of open primary for us by email or some other means than talking.
Yeah. That's your definition.
And Joanne, I see you look like you're talking, but I can't hear you.
Muted myself. Now I'm not muted. Okay, I was unmuted by the host. Okay, I don't know the definition, but I know that's a form of voter suppression because there were some, Democrats maybe who went to the primary and they found out they were independents now and they couldn't vote in the primary. So I think that happened a lot in California, where they showed them as independents. And I think even in Arizona, there were longtime Democrats who were shown as something happened in the MVD, the Department of Motor Vehicles, that changed parties in their system. And so there were people that couldn't vote.
All that computer hacking, Joanne.
Yeah.
I remember that in Arizona.
Yeah, that's why I think we need open primaries to prevent that.
Well, that's a good point right there, because then nobody could mess with anybody. You just go in and take a ballot.
Okay, I'm getting some feedback on my computer. I think we go back to Kate's point, and I think it would be really nice if everybody could take 2 minutes or 10 minutes and just send us a definition of open primary, or send us something that's acceptable as a hybrid of open primary. Because, this is one that we could talk forever about, and it's hard to do it via this. Somehow this machine's not quite working today. I don't know why. At least mine isn't.
Well, you've had that, and Adria's had trouble with her machine, and Ron's speaker, whether he knows it, has been going in and out. And anyway, we've had snowstorms and
yeah,
all kinds of crazy things happening everywhere. So I think this was at least a good presentation that we got, both some comments in the chat. If anyone thinks of anything else before we close, put put it in the chat or, jump in either way. But I think that I appreciate you, Ted, all your work in this group and making this presentation today and keeping everyone engaged. I'll have to learn from a teacher how to engage the classroom better, my own self. But if anyone wants to join either of these working groups, well, Gerrymander's not listed as a working group, but you can always go onto the Facebook group and message me or make a comment there. I want to help with gerrymandering. Or you can join the voters group as we try to kind of refine and finish up this work and maybe kick the tires on it one more time. But now's the time for everyone to that's interested in this, that spread this. You can share, you can send people onto our website so they can listen to this and they can feedback, because we're trying to get everyone's best ideas and comments right now so that we can put together the best possible language that we can.
Oh, they're not only the best, but the most suitable for everybody. And I would really like to see. I mean, this is really an intelligent group of people, and I would like to see. I don't know, Mana, can you give them an open invitation to our messenger or something, and see if they could go that way, so we can get their comments that way?
Yeah, certainly.
You can leave comments also on the on your website.
That's the thing. That's where we're
Okay.
Just we didn't talk about that a lot, you and I, just yet, because we were, kind of closing up. This group is closing in on its work, shall we say. We've been working a while, but what there is designed into our website, so everyone go and take a look at it, is at least 6 working groups have a way that you can sign up to message us through the website. You can sign up to be a part of that group if you're on the call here, or if you're listening to this later on in a recording, go onto the website and sign in to the website, and then you can sign up for a working group. You can also just message me by accessing the Facebook group as well, if that, the website sign up doesn't work right for you. We're in a soft launch and we're kind of working out the bugs right now. And then also, you can learn more on the website. There's something else to sign up for, as I mentioned in the first part of this call, about the ballot initiatives. If you're in a ballot initiative state and would like to kind of get ready to, organize in the state, start, take back election teams there. They can feed into this process right now until we're ready with the language to start collecting signatures later in the year, sometime during the summer, and getting it on the ballots for, hopefully 2018, if not before, depending on the schedule. I was so surprised when your state didn't even have an election every year, because that shows you just how different all the states are and how necessary and helpful this uniformity would be to some degree.